Good evening and welcome to the Carter Center. I'm Mary Ann Peters, CEO of the Carter Center, and I want to thank you for joining us for the first Conversations at the Carter Center of the 2019-2020 season. Tonight's conversation was a hot ticket. It sold out in just 5 minutes. I wonder why. Those of you lucky enough to be here know, or joining us in some other format, know what a real treat it is to get to hear from a former president and a former First Lady in person. And not just any former president and First Lady, but President and Mrs. Carter. As usual, they're going to talk for a little while, and then they'll answer a few questions. And if you have a question for one of them, please write it on one of the index cards we've provided. Volunteers will walk down the aisles at about 7:15 to collect the cards. And those of you watching live on website or Facebook, you can submit your questions via Twitter using hashtag Carter Center Town Hall 19 with Carter, Town, and Hall capitalized. Finally, let me remind you to please silence your cell phones, but do feel free to tweet about what you hear using that same hashtag. Now let's get to the heart of the evening. President and Mrs. Carter founded the Carter Center 37 years ago and put together a remarkable team that has helped improve life for millions of people in more than 80 countries. Together, we wage peace, fight disease, and build hope across the globe. I'll let President and Mrs. Carter tell you more about what we've been working on in the past year and what they themselves have been up to. But let me first say that it is their vision of a healthy, peaceful world that guides our work and serves as an inspiration for millions around the world. Please join me once again in welcoming President and Mrs. Carter.
Well, tonight the boss is going to go first.
I'm going first because this is my favorite time to be here at the Carter Center, and I had a great day. Have our mental health journalism fellows here, and we started this program in 1996, which I think was, if you add it up, was 23 years ago, and we have had 226 fellows, journalism fellows, go through the program. And I think, and I'm going to take credit for my fellows, our fellows, helping to lower stigma. We have a long way to go still, but I think that it's beginning to lift a little bit, and I think my fellows help do that.
Yes.
We've expanded the program. We have a program in Latin America. Actually, it's in Colombia, but Colombia spreads out to other countries around. And United Arab Emirates and Qatar. And our fellows, Carter Center fellows, have won all kinds of awards. Actually, one was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, which I thought was exciting. And the fellows are here tonight with the Journalism Fellows Advisory Board members and very distinguished people. And just as distinguished is the Carter Center Mental Health Task Force. They're all here in the balcony. And let's give them all a big hand. I've talked about our program in Liberia. When we started this program 10 years ago, there was one psychiatrist in the whole country. Now we have 350 mental health clinicians. And about 100 of those work with children, which is exciting to me. Another program that the Carter Center Mental Health Task Force mental health program has that I'm proud of is a school-based program. And actually, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I got a call from the head of the Centers for Disease Control. He's fairly new. Well, he's been here since May. And he wanted an hour with me. And I had no idea he wanted, but when I came to Atlanta and met with him, and he is so excited about the school-based program. He said he'd been wanting somebody to take that on for a long time. So he's going to be helping us. The Centers for Disease Control is going to be helping us with that program, expanding it over Georgia, and then he said over the whole country. So that's really, really exciting to me. One other thing we're trying to do, parity was passed in 2008, parity for coverage of mental illnesses and substance use illnesses on a par with insurance, on a par with other illnesses. And it was passed, as I said, in 2008, but never implemented. And so it's just, insurance companies have just come up with their own way to implement it, so it's just a big problem now in the whole country. And so we are getting together, people in our state and hopefully others, to see if there's something we can do about getting parity passed and implemented. It's not going to be easy. In fact, it's probably going to take a long time, but at least we've begun working towards it. So I think I'm going to let Jimmy go for his turn now.
Thank you. Well, as I've often said, sometimes under duress, if the Carter Center had never done anything except sponsor Rosa's mental health program, we would have been worthwhile for the last 30-something years. Well, we're celebrating this year the 40th anniversary of my normalizing relations with China. And since 1979, China has not been at war with anybody. In the meantime, of course, as you know, the United States has been at war with Iraq and Afghanistan and Sudan and with Syria and with many other countries. And we've spent about an average of $2 trillion on these unnecessary wars. China has not spent anything except to build 1,700 new universities and 18,000 miles of high-speed railroad. That's over 200 miles an hour per train. How many miles have we built in the United States? 0. And they will eliminate extreme poverty in China this year. So that just shows the difference between peace and war. In Mali, we're the official observer for the peace agreement reached in Mali. It has about 75 different facets to it, and we give a quarterly report every 3 months to the United Nations on this. And we are the first non-governmental organization ever asked to perform this duty as an official observer. In Sudan, we're also monitoring that country, which is changing government, as you know, when Bashir was overthrown. And they have a kind of a quasi-government there, and the Carter Center is monitoring their process of forming a new government. In democracy, we've completed 107 elections by monitoring them. And we just finished the one in Tunisia on the 15th of this month. And we're going to issue our report today, I understand. And we're also helping in Guyana. Guyana, as you may know, the President Granger was declared, was voted with a no confidence vote in the parliament. So he's got an interim government now. I talked to him on the cell phone on the way up here to Atlanta today, and we're trying to help in Guyana as well. One of the great threats that the whole world faces now is digital interference in democracy, where Facebook are used to distort what would have been an honest and fair election. You may know that happened in the United States as well, where Russia interfered in our election, and primarily through Facebook and other social issues. And so we're having a special program on that in April in here in one of these conversations, and we still have room for some other ones if you want to come and attend that meeting to see what's going on in the United States and also what the Carter Center is doing around the world. We're having our annual Human Rights Defenders Program in the middle of October, and that's open also to the public. Our Access to Information program has changed its name to Rule of Law, and we have programs, as you know, in Bangladesh, Liberia, and Guatemala. Now to get from our peace program to the health programs, let me say that we are going to stop reporting on how many people we treat and report every now and then to you on how many treatments were formerly required that we no longer have to do. With trachoma, we don't have to do any more treatments in Nigeria, Mali, and Ghana. On river blindness, which is an eyesight problem, we don't have to do any more treatments in Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Guatemala, and Sudan, and Uganda. On lymphatic filariasis, how many of you know what lymphatic filariasis is? It's when your arms and legs and sexual organs swell up to grotesque sizes. We've got 7 million people that no longer require treatment in Nigeria, and in the Dominican Republic, which is next door to us, we don't have any more lymphatic filariasis. In Chad, by the way, Haiti also is in that same island, and now in Haiti we've eliminated 83% of the malaria that was there. We still have a little bit of malaria left. Guinea worm, I don't have a very good report to make. We've had an outbreak in Chad primarily of dogs, and we have about 2,500 dogs now that have guinea worm, and they're transmitting it indirectly in a circle to humans. And so we have 29 cases of guinea worm in human beings, primarily in Chad, but also 1 case in Angola and 1 case in Cameroon. But the Carter Center, and working with the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech and many other universities and research centers, are trying to figure out how the cycle includes dogs and what we can do about it. I've given some advice to the Carter Center. This might be the last conversations that Rosa and I will ever have with you. I'm 95 years old. I was just starting to take 20 years off my age. And Rosa is 92, so now you know her age as well. She might get on me when I get home with her tonight. But anyway, this may be our last conversations with you, but we may or may not have one next year. But I've given the Carter Center some advice. One thing that I think the Carter Center ought to concentrate on from now on is wars by the United States as well as other countries. We've never voiced an opinion publicly, this is primarily my fault, about the plethora of wars in which the United States has been involved. I won't give you any more statistics between us and China. China has not been at war since 1979, where we've been in many wars, as I've just said. But let me just give you one statistic. The United States has been a nation now since the Declaration of Independence in 1776. That's 243 years. We have been at war 226 years. We have been at peace for 16 years. 16 years. So that shows you that the United States is very deeply inclined to go to war. And part of that is because the American people are inclined to go to war if it is a mechanism by which we can implant American policies, political policies, in other countries. And we also make a hero out of our presidents who become the commander-in-chief of our military forces. So, because of many reasons, some of them social reasons like I just mentioned, the United States almost constantly stays at war. 226 years out of 243 that we've been in existence as a nation. Peaceful, only 16 years. I won't tell you who had 4 of those years. So I've recommended to the Carter Center that in my absence in the future, that the Chief Executive Officer and the Chairman of the Board, who's my grandson now, Jason, that they concentrate on promoting peace as a pure subject, as one of the human rights to live in peace, as well as other facets of environment. And the other one, the main thing that I think is the most important issue that faces the United States and the world today is global warming. The Carter Center has been basically mute on the subject of global warming, but I've encouraged our trustees to adopt those 2 things as new subjects, and also to start concentrating more criticism and constructive criticism on the United States government. And one reason, one way I think we can do this without being partisan about it is to try to make the United States the #1 champion of peace, so that people living in all other countries in the world in a few years will say, why don't we go to Washington and see how they do it, because they don't have any wars. I would also like for us to be the #1 champion of human rights, so that, again, anybody abused could come to the United States and find a champion there. I would like for us to be the champion of environment. So peace and human rights and environment. And I would also like for the United States to be the champion of equality of human beings, to treat everybody the same, whether they're black or white, or regardless of their sexual preferences, or regardless of whether they're married or single, or anything else, or regardless of religion. So those are the few things that I've recommended in my absence. I admit I should have done some of those early on, and I have to say that I'm just recommending these. The chairman of our board of trustees is sitting on the front row, and he's somewhat frowning, but we all want that. We're ready. They're ready, okay. So I've already talked to this about some of the fellows, but I think those are some of the new things that I believe the Carter Center can do in the future, as well as continue with our peace program as we have it already, and also with our health programs. We'll be shifting from one disease to another as we eliminate some, and as we do get rid of people in the world that have our diseases that we have concentrated on. But as you may know, we have the only task force on disease eradication in the world. And here, under the Carter Center's direction, for a number of years, we have analyzed every human illness to ascertain which ones might possibly be eradicated from the face of the earth, that is, eradicated completely, or eliminated from a particular country. And I've just given you a long list of countries in which we no longer have to treat people against river blindness and trachoma and so forth. So that winds up my presentation to you. And thank you all very much for coming. And now we'll have with some trepidation, some questions.
President Carter, we'll get right on that agenda. I have a question here. And you mentioned, sir, that this year marks the 40th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations with China. The questioner points out that today marks the 41st anniversary of the Camp David Accords and asks, what do you think of the situation in the Middle East today?
I think it has deteriorated tremendously since I left office. And if I had had a second term, I think we could have implemented a lot of the Camp David Accords that were negotiated and agreed to unanimously by me and Begin and Sadat on behalf of our governments. And by the way, all those agreements were ratified by the parliaments of the governments as well as the leaders. But unfortunately, Israel has never reached a peace agreement or given the Palestinians their rights as guaranteed in Camp David. The treaty between Israel and Egypt has never had a single word of the agreement violated. And I would say Israel and Egypt are probably better friends now than they were 40-something years ago. So I would say that if Netanyahu is reelected today, we just saw news on the television about the election there. It's uncertain. If he's elected, then I think the process will go down even further, because he has promised that if he is reelected, he's going to confiscate a good portion of the West Bank and Gaza, including the Jordan River Valley, and which I think would bring an end to all the peace processes that anybody is attempting to implement. I hope I answered your question.
You answered the question, sir, but I have another one. This one is from Chase Stell, and since you brought up the topic of what would have happened in a second Carter administration, I thought I would ask this question. Mr. or Ms. Stell says, Grover Cleveland served 2 non-consecutive terms. What will it take to convince you to run for president?
Well, I hope there's an age limit. You know, if I were just 80 years old, if I was 15 years younger, I don't believe I could undertake the duties that I experienced when I was president. But one thing, you have to be very flexible with your mind. You have to be able to go from one subject to another and concentrate on each one adequately, and then put them all together in a comprehensive way like I did between Begin and Sadat with the peace agreement. You also have to be able to adopt new ideas like normalizing relations with China after we had formally recognized Taiwan as the only China. And so I think a lot of those things you have to have a lot of personal courage too, like we had when we implemented the Panama Canal treaties. So, you know, the things that I faced just in foreign affairs, I don't think that I could undertake them if I was 80 years old. So 95 is out of the question. I'm having a hard time walking. By the way, the reason I limped when I walked in, I broke my hip a few months ago, and I'm learning how to walk again. So is Rosen, by the way. So I think the time has passed for me to be involved actively in politics, much less to run for president.
Mrs. Carter, are there plans to expand the mental health program?
Are your plans to expand?
To expand the mental health program, sorry.
We're expanding it all along with our school-based program, which is fairly new, and with the parity, which is going to take up a lot of time, but also working with the Centers for Disease Control. We're really going to expand the school-based program all over Georgia. I haven't been thinking about anything else because we've got these 2 new things right now.
We do have a lot on the mental health plate. President Carter, what would you like to hear the Democratic candidates saying that you have not yet heard?
I would like for them to adopt the program I just described for the Carter Senate. I'd like for them to pledge to promote and to be the world champion of peace, the world champion of human rights, the world champion of environmental quality, and the world champion of equality of treatment among people. If they would do those four things, I would probably vote for them. But so far they haven't done it, but I'm going to vote for one of them, and I haven't decided yet which one. I voted for Bernie Sanders last time, and Rosa did too, but I'm going to keep an open mind. One of the major factors that I will have in my mind is who can beat Trump, because I think it would be a disaster to have 4 more years with Trump. This is a non-political meeting.
President and Mrs. Carter, what is your advice to families that have been divided by politics? How do we bring unity back?
What's your advice to families separated, divided by politics?
I don't know what they can do. I would tell them to make a lot of noise and go after the government officials, I think. I don't know how they could do that, but I think it's just a tragedy to separate the children from their parents. And I don't know if they're in a position to make noise or not, but they could try, I think. I would tell them to demonstrate, make a lot of noise.
The question was, what if a husband and wife had a different opinion about politics? That's what I mean by divided family.
That was it. Oh, I thought, okay, I didn't know that was the question. What if the husband and wife had a different feeling about politics?
Yeah.
I think they would fight a lot.
Luckily, Rosa and I have agreed most of the time, particularly in 1976.
President Carter, I have two with the same theme. One says, we know your comments will have to be limited, but would you please comment on the situation between Saudi Arabia and Iran? And the other one asks for your view of the current crisis in the Mideast with a larger number of players, Yemen, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Iran.
I think I'm more friendly toward Iran than the government is, than Trump and John Bolton were, and maybe the Secretary of State Pompeo. But when I was president, Saudi Arabia was a very strong supporter of almost all my policies. When I tried to normalize relations between Egypt and Israel, Saudi Arabia was right there behind me, supporting me. So I have kind of torn feelings. After Iran captured our hostages, of course, I imposed the first economic punishment on Iran, and but I got over it soon. As you will remember, all the hostages that were taken were with the new government. They represented the Ayatollah and not the Shah of Iran. So I've always thought we ought to have good relationship with all countries, and one thing I like about Trump is that he seems to be reluctant to go to war. And don't ask me anything else I like about him. But that's one thing that I do like about him. But I hope that we can have diplomatic means to resolve that issue between Saudi Arabia and Iran, no matter who is found to be responsible for the bombing of our oil field and oil storage facilities. And I just want to keep our whole world at peace. So I would say resolve the issue diplomatically, and I believe that's what the president is inclined to do. And as far as being friendly with Iran, I think we ought to try to find some way to talk directly to them with mutual respect, like I did with China 40 years ago. So I've kind of equivocated on the answer. I don't have a clear answer about whether we should choose sides firmly or not, but no matter what side we choose, and we apparently have chosen Saudi Arabia, I think we ought to try to keep peace in the Far East.
Thank you, sir. For both President and Mrs. Carter, what is the best piece of advice you received early in your life?
Best piece of advice.
Best piece of advice you received early in your life?
Well, the best piece of advice I received that I remember was from my high school superintendent, Miss Judy Coleman. She used to tell all of us young people in Plains High School, you must accommodate changing times, which we really have to do in modern days, but cling to principles that never change. And I think every human being has to adopt certain principles to guide us. One of my strongest ones is do not lie. I was taught that by my father and also later on by the Naval Academy. You were ejected from the Naval Academy immediately if you ever told even a small lie. And so those are the kind of principles we need to adopt. And so the best advice that Rosa and I ever got when we got married was give each other plenty of space. Don't try to dominate one another. We still do that.
My daddy died when I was 13, and my mother I was the oldest child, 3 younger siblings, and my mother told me that I was going to have to be very grown up and responsible and help her with the children. And so I always remember that because it was not easy. My little sister was 4 years old, 2 brothers in between, but it was a turning point in my life. I had to grow up, and but I'll always remember her taking me aside and saying that you're going to have to grow up, and it was a hard time.
Mrs. Carter, President Carter has already answered this, but this one is for you. The question says, Mrs. Carter, my husband says he has heard great marital advice from President Carter. There's no identification on the card. My husband says he has heard great marital advice from President Carter. Do you have advice to a wife for a long and happy marriage?
Advice for a wife.
A long and happy marriage.
I think it's space, as Jimmy said. I think I told him that. The first time we had been at home, both of us, all the time, was when we left the White House. For a long time, I don't remember early in our, well, he was in the Navy and gone early in our marriage, but it was tough. And I had turned the bedroom in my house to my office, one end of the house, and he had turned what had been our garage into his office at the other end of the house, which worked. And but I think the space is so important, and if you're bogged down to somebody who just puts pressure on all the time for you to do things you don't want to do, that's not fun.
I don't think anyone will disagree with that.
We've tried also to find things that both of us like to do,
That's right.
and I wrote a book about that called Sharing Good Times, where we each had hobbies, and the other one adopted some of them and didn't want to fool with the others. So we've learned to ski, downhill ski together, and cross-country ski together, and go bird watching together, and play tennis together, and so forth. So we try to find hobbies that we both like. Also, another thing that person may have got from me was we try to, if we have arguments during the day, which we do frequently, we try to be reconciled to each other every night before we go to sleep. And we pretty well succeed with that. One of the things we do to help with that reconciliation is to read the Bible here every night, one page in the Bible. And one night, Rosa usually reads, and the other night, I read. And sometimes we read the Bible through in Spanish just so we can review our Spanish a little bit. So if I'm overseas and she's at home, it always kind of brings us close together, even at a distance, when we read the same passage in the Bible.
It's hard to keep fighting after you read the Bible.
This questioner asks, what should be done to address racial reconciliation in the United States? And I think that one is for both President and Mrs. Carter.
Well, as I advise the Carter Center, treat everybody equally. And I grew up in an area of a nation which was completely segregated. When I was a child, black and white people didn't do anything much together except work in the fields together and go shopping together and sort of things like that. But when we got on a train to ride to Americus, which was 9 miles away, when an African-American child and I, who was my good friend, A.D. Davis, A.D. would get in the colored section of the train and I would get in the white section. And we'd get out in Americus and walk to the theater from a train station, and we would hold hands and walk down the street as bosom buddies. When we got to the theater, A.D. would buy his ticket up on the 3rd floor where the seats were harder than these you're sitting in now, and we would sit in the very commodious place downstairs. And we'd get back on the train and ride back together in separate cars. So African Americans were not given the right to vote then, and they didn't serve on juries. So the juries that tried both African Americans and white people were completely white. I saw then as a child how much damage that did to them and indirectly to us. And so that's one reason I've been concentrating pretty much on human rights during my adult life. So that was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Thank you, sir.
I don't like to say, criticize our president, but I think we need a new president. I'm so disturbed about white power and that kind of thing. And I really think that some things, he says he's not a racist, and maybe he's not, but some of the things he says, I think encourages racism.
Thank you. On a lighter note, perhaps, President Carter, you will be 95 soon. Is there any goal you had that you have not yet achieved?
Learning how to walk well again. I don't think so, except just to see my great-grandchildren grow up like my grandchildren already have, and to be harmonious with Rosalynn for the rest of my life. So that's a big challenge. Because she's inclined to do things her own way, which I've encouraged in the past. So I think just to be more with my family and intimate with my family in different ways.
Mrs. Carter, you're not 95 yet, nowhere near there, but what goal did you have that you have not yet achieved?
What goal have you not yet achieved?
I have not done away with stigma. I've worked on mental health issues for 48 years, trying to get rid of stigma, and it's still prevalent. It's so distressing.
But you're making progress, Mrs. Carter.
We're
Yes.
making a little progress because one reason is because I'm
When I had cancer a few years back of my liver and brain, I said that I would like to get rid of guinea worm before I die, and I still want to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm turning that over to you, Jason.
Here's a question that is repeated several times from different questioners. Are you optimistic about the future of our country and the world?
Yes, I still have complete confidence that the United States, if given time, will resolve its basic problems. We've always been able to do that in the past with slavery and then with segregation officially, and then with women's votes and that sort of thing. So whenever in the history of the United States we've faced a very difficult question, we have ultimately, sometimes it takes a long time, been able to resolve it. And I think the United States still has that innate strength that comes from having such a diverse population. So I'm very optimistic about the future of the United States, economically and also in social affairs.
Thank you, sir. With all your years of service, what do you still find to be the most challenging aspect of serving your fellow man?
Well, maintaining your religious principles, which means putting other people first. If you have a deep religious faith, I'd say either Christianity or Judaism or others, then we are taught in church or synagogue or mosque that we need to put other people first and so forth. So I think that maintaining our religious faith, when it gets to be difficult to do so, and get rid of our selfish inclinations, which come natural to everybody, is the biggest obstacle to overcome.
May I ask one more question for each of you? Okay. I'm going to take that as a yes. Thank you very much, President Carter. Mrs. Carter, what was your most memorable White House memory? Your most memorable White House memory?
I think it was when Jimmy called me from Camp David and said that they had gotten a treaty.
It's a good one.
With Camp David, and I was at Camp David all those 13 days, I think it was. Yeah. But it was a Sunday, and we had an event at the White House. Rostropovich, I think it was going to perform. And so I had to go in and introduce him. And so he was playing away, and somebody came and got me. I didn't want to leave. I was presiding. But I went to the telephone. It was Jimmy who said, "We have the agreement, but don't tell anybody." Now, that was hard. That was hard. And Mrs. Biggin was with me. And the program was over, and we were supposed to have a helicopter to take us to Camp David, and it wasn't there. And she kept wanting to know why we weren't leaving, and where's the helicopter? And anyway, I remember the helicopter landing on the lawn, on the south lawn. I'm trying to describe where it is, but you can see the Washington Monument from the south lawn. They landed and they came walking up, and she was standing by me, and Menachem Begin said to his wife, "Mama, we're going to go down in history for this." That was kind of an interesting moment.
I should end on that note, but I do have another question for President Carter, and it is, how is it that in the United States we don't have consistent, secure, uniform, accessible voting? Elections, voting. How is it that we don't have consistent, secure, uniform, accessible voting?
Well, if we were called upon as the Carter Center to monitor an election in the United States, except for the Indian tribes, we would say you don't qualify, because our standards for monitoring an election require, first of all, that everybody have equal access to the television, ostensibly. Sometimes it's not accurate, but that's one of our requirements. The other requirement is that every country in which we monitor the election has a uniform way of ascertaining the results of the election. As a matter of fact, we have 444 different ways to monitor an election, to have an election declared won, and that's every county in the United States is different. And of course, every state is different. And our elections are really called by the NBC or CBS, ABC are now one of the channels, 24-hour channels. So we don't have a uniform way to mark ballots, to count ballots, or anything else. And that's one reason that the Carter Center is working on that distortion of election results by social media. And you come back in April, we have conversations and hear that discussion. As you know, the Russians were able to distort the election of 2016 pretty grossly by resorting to Facebook and Twitter and so forth. So I would say that the original formation of our country, to which I referred earlier in 1776 or a little bit later, is when we decided to give the states certain ultimate authority. So Georgia has a completely different authority from the United States to run our elections the way we choose in Georgia. And there are some uniform rules promulgated by the U.S. Congress, but they rarely do that. So the Congress and the Supreme Court are very reluctant to have the states' rights to run their own election circumscribed or restricted. So a lot of the distortion comes from that. Jason has been involved in some lawsuits concerning the gerrymandering of congressional districts, and of course that's what our Congress depends upon to choose the president, make the final decision of the president, is how those congressional districts are divided and how the states get their allocation of funds and votes. So the Constitution basically says that each state is independent, and that's one of the reasons why we have such a diverse way of conducting elections.
And
that's a long, rambling answer.
I think it. And with that, it's time for us to wrap up. I'd like to thank President and Mrs. Carter for taking the time to be with us, sharing their wisdom and insights, and I'd like to thank all of you for your interest in our work. We hope to see you at our next conversation on October 16th, which is entitled Standing Strong Against Attacks on Human Rights. And don't forget the one in April on digital threats to democracy. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you, everybody.